So, in terms of strategies, if you want to kind of inhibit the strategic learners and try to kind of shift their attention away from the grades and the rewards, often it's helpful to lower the stakes in some way. So this may mean giving students multiple opportunities to show what they know, not having one giant test at the end of the semester that everything's riding on. That's going to really focus their attention on that grade and not on the learning process as you go. So having multiple smaller tests along the way, giving students opportunities to show what they know in different ways, perhaps. Maybe their final assignment is a paper or a poster. Giving students the opportunity to revise and resubmit. I found a lot of success with having students do corrections on tests after they get them back. It could be that you build a little slack in the system. So maybe you assign 10 problem sets over the course of the semester. Students get to drop one of them. Those are all techniques that will help to lower the stakes a little bit. Now, we have to be realistic. We're not going to remove the stakes entirely. At least in most higher education systems, students get a grade at the end of the semester, and that grade really does have some meaning. It's going to affect where they go to grad school, what kind of jobs they get, whether or not they finish the program. Those things are not unimportant. But I think there are things we can do to try to lower those stakes a little bit to take some of the pressure off so that students can focus a little bit more on learning. One of the most important things we can do in this category is not grading on the curve. When we say things like only 10% of you are going to get A's and the next 20% are going to get B's and that's it, what we've done is we've set up a very competitive classroom environment. And for most students, that's going to shift them from those from deep learning strategies to strategic learning strategies. And so that's a real way to raise the stakes and not lower the stakes. Better to say, here's what it needs, here's what you have to be able to do in order to get an A, and see how many students can reach that bar. Now, in terms of those intrinsic motivators, there are strategies we can use to try to leverage those as well. So again, we're looking at competence and autonomy and purpose and community. So when it comes to competence, this is kind of the Goldilocks effect, right? You want something that's not too hard and not too easy. So this involves knowing where your students are, what they bring with them to the course, what they find challenging, what they don't find challenging, and trying to kind of pitch the course, pitch your activities and assignments at the right level so that students are challenged, but it's not so overwhelming that they give up. In terms of autonomy, when you can give students some choice, either in maybe a topic they get to explore for a project, or maybe it is in kind of the format of what they report. Maybe some students would prefer a presentation to a poster or a paper. Or maybe it's just giving students some choice in how they earn participation points in a particular course. Those are strategies you can use to give students a little bit more autonomy so that they have a little bit more control over kind of how they navigate the course and show their learning. And most of them will find that really motivating. The paper topic selection it can be really helpful to have students kind of connect your course with things that they're interested in. And that brings us to the idea of purpose. Helping students see why they're in this course, what it can do what it can do for them, helping them understand kind of what the connections are between their personal and professional and vocational interests and this course can be really powerful. So pointing them to the kinds of things they can do with your course material when they leave the course. Also, I think there's another aspect of this that sometimes students feel there's not a lot of purpose in what they're doing in a class because they're just taking these tests or doing these projects and turning them in and then moving along with their lives. One technique that can be kind of interesting is having some type of authentic audience for students' work. So maybe you have students take some complex ideas and explain them for a kind of lay audience through some YouTube videos, right? That can be a really challenging process for students, but knowing that they're going to share their results with a real audience out there in the World Wide Web can be really motivating, and they can take the work very seriously. Or maybe you engage your students in some type of service learning project where they're applying the skills that they're learning in your course for community organizations that need different types of assistance or help, and that the service is valuable to them, but also a really good learning experience for your students. Maybe it's just having an external client for a project, right? This is a fairly common strategy in engineering courses, particularly senior design courses, having students do work for external clients that are really interested in what they have to come up with. All of that can increase the level of purpose in the assignments in your courses that you give students. Finally, there's this idea of community and trying to create a learning community among your students. Again, it's not necessarily going to happen, actually. Just because you've got a bunch of people in the room doesn't mean that they form a learning community. You've got to do what you can to help them get to know each other, give them opportunities to share what they know with each other, to share their own interests with each other, so that they can start to see that they can, in fact, learn from each other. So I'm going to end with one example from my own classroom practice that I think it illustrates at least a few of these principles. And it's an activity I've done in a couple of different courses that I would call social bookmarking. And so I started in my cryptography course a couple of years ago doing this. I found that students were coming to this course with lots of different interests in the course. Some of them liked the codes and the ciphers. Some of them liked the puzzle solving. Some of them liked the mathematics. Some of them liked the history and the espionage aspects of cryptography. Others were interested in kind of modern day computer security and encryption technologies. And so what I had them do was I had them use this kind of shared site where they were bookmarking, kind of saving links to news articles and websites and resources that they had found that appealed to them. And I think this worked really well for this course, in part because the students were fairly well motivated already, right? This was a small course. They had a lot of options for this course, and so they all had some kind of interest in cryptography. But since they were connecting their individual interests with resources that they shared with the entire course, both online and during class, we would take a fair amount of class time each week and pull up some of these examples and stories and discuss them as a class. I think they started to see each other as people they can learn from, right? That we were kind of in this together, learning together, sharing what we were finding out with each other. And so I think that's pretty powerful. I tried this again in my statistics course. That was a very different course. I had 70 students who largely were taking it because it was a required course. In that case, I wanted them to start to see the relevance of statistics to things that they were interested in, to their careers, to their majors. And so I had them find different types of resources, but I still wanted them to go and find examples of statistics in action and share that back with the class. And that worked reasonably well. Not quite as well as with the cryptography students. But I think in all of these cases, I'm giving them a task that's actually not too hard. It may be a little too easy on the competence scale, actually. It's a pretty low barrier to entry to find a website with something interesting and share it with your classmates. But it certainly tapped into the kind of autonomy and purpose ideas. Students could kind of go in lots of different directions with this, find different types of resources or different topics. And I encouraged them to try to tap into things that they were already interested in so they could start seeing the connections between our course material and those interests. And I think it also served to help create this learning community feel, where students saw that they could actually learn from each other and build on the resources and examples that their peers shared. Now, this isn't the only way to foster student motivation. And so in the videos that follow, you'll see some interviews with faculty in a few different fields talking about the teaching strategies they've used and found successful in motivating students. As you listen to these interviews, look for these 4 ideas: competency, autonomy, purpose, and community, and see how the teaching choices that these faculty made tapped into these ideas to leverage student motivation.